Hello everyone, this is Miyagawa. Today we have returned to the Kaizuka juniper that was featured in our previous video on thinning pruning. This Kaizuka juniper was previously maintained through clipping pruning. About a year has passed since we performed the thinning pruning, and today we'll be observing how the branches and foliage have budded and grown over that time, while considering how we might prune it going forward. This is what it looked like before pruning. Since we thinned and pruned it back rather heavily last time, we can see that it has sprouted back more vigorously than usual. We can observe that there are more vigorous new shoots, especially in the upper part of the tree, indicating that the upper section has stronger vitality and budding power. It's quite common for trees to produce stronger new growth after a heavy pruning. On the other hand, pruning too hard can sometimes weaken the tree, so although we could have cut it back a little further, I believe the intensity of the previous pruning was appropriate. Apart from the upper part, which showed strong new growth, the rest of the tree still retained a rather open and airy appearance. Now, let's take a closer look at the upper section to observe the condition of the branches and foliage in more detail. From the upper part of the tree, the strength of the new growth could be felt even more clearly than when viewed from below. Some of the longer branches have grown about 80 centimeters, and we could see quite a few branches that have extended in a similar way. Although there is almost no openness left in the canopy, when we part the branches and look inside, we can find many new shoots growing within the inner sections as well. Since the branches were pulled back last time, allowing more sunlight to reach the interior, we can now observe this new budding inside the tree. Next, we move to a section slightly below the upper part. Here as well, we can see new buds developing on the inner branches. When pruning, it's important not to damage these inner buds, as they will be nurtured for about 3 years and then used to replace the outer branches. This is the method used to maintain the overall size of the tree. We could also observe many other similar new buds inside. Here we can see the spots where pruning was done last year, and many of the new shoots have sprouted about 15 centimeters in front of those cuts. On the other hand, there were no buds sprouting closer than that, so it seems that the limit for inner budding might be around that distance. In addition to the inner budding, the branches around the outer contour that were pruned last year have also become quite full, giving the impression that this year's pruning will be easier, with more options to choose from. Finally, let's take a look at the lower branches. The branch structure, as seen from the inside, has remained just as beautiful as before. It seems that most of the noticeable growth occurred in the outer canopy around the upper area, along with a small amount of new budding. In the lower branches as well, although not as many as in the upper parts, we could still observe some new inner buds. Since I had assumed that the lower branches would be less likely to produce new buds, this was a pleasant discovery. We'll now proceed with the pruning, but since the basic pruning method remains the same as before, I'll skip the detailed explanation and instead talk about the purpose of today's work. As with the previous session, the main objectives are to reduce the outer contour and adjust the number of branches. Regarding the outer contour, last year we pruned it back as much as possible, but since there were few leaves on the inner side at that time, the reduction was limited. So this time, we'll continue with the same focus, aiming to reduce it further where possible. As for the branch adjustment, although we reduced some branches last year, there are still too many, so we'll continue thinning them out this time as well. Since it's been a year and we now have more inner budding and fuller outer branches, I expect that today's pruning will go more smoothly and efficiently. With these two key points in mind, reducing the outer contour and adjusting the number of branches, we'll proceed with today's pruning. Alright, the pruning of the upper section is now complete. It now has an atmosphere almost like a piece of sculpture, as if new life were emerging from within. There were plenty of options to choose from during the pruning, which made the work very smooth and enjoyable. When we take a closer look, it appears like this. Since this was a thinning style pruning, there's some variation in the contour, but compared to last year's cut lines, we were able to prune on average about 15 to 20 centimeters further inward, so we can clearly feel that the overall outline has been successfully reduced. This is one of the old cut marks from the previous pruning, and this time we were able to prune about 20 centimeters further inward. We continued pruning in the same way afterward and were able to thin out many of the larger branches as well. Now that the overall pruning is complete, all that remains is cleaning up and making some fine adjustments. It turned out to be another very good pruning session, and I think the tree's form has become even more beautiful than before. As for the time it took for pruning, last time it took about a day and a half just to finish the pruning work, but this time, even with a short break around 10 o'clock, we were able to complete it in less than half a day. The less time and effort required for pruning management, the lighter the overall maintenance load becomes, so I believe this is also a very positive development. That concludes today's video. How did you find it? I believe we were also able to demonstrate that even an overgrown Kaizuka juniper hedge can be rejuvenated and reduced in size by thinning the branches and encouraging new inner shoots to grow. With this second pruning now completed, the direction of the branches has gradually become more uniform. As for future maintenance, it would be perfectly fine to continue with the same level of detailed thinning as before. Alternatively, you could switch to using a pair of fine double-edged shears and perform a more delicate pruning that also includes the smaller tweaks. For residential gardens, the current level of pruning should be more than sufficient. However, for those who wish to achieve a higher degree of refinement, such as in traditional restaurants or historical gardens where formality is emphasized, a finer level of pruning would help to further elevate the garden's dignity and aesthetic quality. As I mentioned last time, Branch pruning is certainly important. However, since it deals with details that are not visible unless you look closely, it's essential to first focus on the overall framework, the planting layout and combinations. Next, pay attention to the tree form and then, as in this case, proceed to branch and foliage pruning. Taking these steps in the proper order is the key to effective garden management. This pruning project began with the renovation work we carried out previously. At that time, we pruned this tree for the first time. While the planting layout itself posed no problems, the tree's form and foliage created a sense of heaviness and visual imbalance within the garden. To correct this, we performed a broad thinning prune last time to encourage interior buds to sprout. In this session, we've made further refinements through additional pruning and thinning, making use of the new growth from last year. As a result, we expect even greater flexibility in pruning in the coming year. As the pruning flexibility increases, it also becomes possible to enjoy the tree's form in a wider variety of ways. Even in its current state, the tree already has a strong and impressive presence, but if you ever feel the shape looks a little too simple, you can also explore creating a more intricate and dynamic form. If you have any thoughts or feedback about this video, please feel free to share them in the comments. Although the updates may come slowly, I intend to keep this channel going, so I would truly appreciate your continued support.